Hi, this is PJ Scott, and welcome to this edition of Veterans Forum. Let me say off the top that if you're a school teacher, you might want to tape this program. We're going to be talking a lot about history and geography today, and this might be a great program for you to show your students around Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. Yes, that's our topic today, Pearl Harbor and World War II. You can see that I brought my uncle out of the closet, my personal World War II veteran, but I have two live World War II veterans with me today that I'm very excited to introduce you to today. I have Mr. Jim Johnson, who was a Marine, and you fought at Iwo Jima, right?
Yes.
And we're going to get into your other battles. I'm sure you did more than that. And then to his left, we have Robert Gardner, who is the commander at the post that we are taping at today here at Port Orchard. He is the commander of Post 30, American Legion, and you were a sailor, is that right, Bob?
I hope so. That's what they told me I was.
Well, you were on merchant marine ships, is that right?
That's right. I was a Navy gun crew aboard the merchant marine ship.
Right.
Lifeboat, Navy.
Great. Well, listen, I always start the show telling veterans in particular that I'd really love it if they would join veteran service organizations. You need to do that so your benefits for veterans keep coming. We have an all-volunteer force now. There's no draft, and they have to honey up the pot with good veterans benefits. And also, our politicians, I believe, when they go to vote, they look at a head count in the American Legion and the veterans of foreign wars. And if they don't have a big head count, they might think we veterans don't care about benefits. Let's show them that we do. Now, Pearl Harbor happened December 7th, 1941, as most people know. And last September 11th, I was watching a couple of newscasts, and some, not all, some of the media people really tried to diminish what happened at Pearl Harbor as if it was just sort of a minor speed bump in the road of history, that 9/11 was way worse. I'm not trying to take away from 9/11, but having a degree in history, I know that Pearl Harbor was not a speed bump in the road. Where were you at, Jim, when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was born and raised in Nebraska. I was a 17-year-old, still in high school.
Were you a senior, ready to graduate?
I was getting ready to graduate. I would in June. Pearl Harbor Day was a Sunday.
Right.
And like every teenager at that time, you were hoping to make a few bucks.
Sure.
So I had an opportunity to load grain in a truck and haul it to the elevator, 100 bushels or more.
Still in the wintertime in December in Nebraska, you were still doing that. Okay.
There was snow on the ground. A particular farmer wanted to sell a few bushels of oats so he could have some Christmas money.
Right.
And I just happened to be able to make $1 that day, which was, a 17-year-old boy, was quite a bit of money.
So how did you find out about it? Did he tell you?
After I got home in the evening, the radio was on, and they started talking about Pearl Harbor. And I says, where's that? I don't think anybody, or not very many people, knew that Pearl Harbor was in Hawaii. And of course, when the news got more along, then we knew that where it was.
Japanese bombs killed at least 5 persons and injured many others, 3 seriously, in a surprise morning aerial attack today on Honolulu. The sky was filled with puffs of smoke from exploding shells fired by American Army and Navy anti-aircraft units. Viewed from the hills back of Honolulu, where many city folk went to view the fight, columns of heavy black smoke went skyward from Pearl Harbor.
But, and then right after Pearl Harbor, it got in my mind that I better do something. So I kept on.
You and millions of others.
I kept on in school until April. I would have graduated in June.
You mean you missed graduating by 2 months?
2 months.
Oh, gee. Patriotic.
On April 9th, I went hitchhiked all the way to Omaha.
Uh-huh.
And enlisted in the Corps.
Did your mama know about that?
My mama knew.
She knew you were hitchhiking?
She was a little worried because
I bet.
my oldest brother, Lee, was unlucky enough to be drafted into the 1-year service.
Uh-huh.
And of course he was 4 years after that he got out, but he served 5 years. So she was a little worried about me being in the Army or in the
Marines?
in the Marine Corps.
What made you choose the Marines?
Well, I always had a liking for the Marine Corps, and
Was your father a Marine?
there was no servicemen in my family before.
Okay.
I did have one half-brother in World War I, but I never knew him. He was so much older than I. But,
So did the Marines take you with no problem at all?
well, yeah.
That was a silly question. Where were you, Bob, when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was in East Los Angeles.
Well, you were a lot closer than Nebraska then.
Yes, I was. And I was at the table drinking soup, believe it or not.
The sky was filled with puffs of smoke from exploding shells fired by American Army and Navy anti-aircraft units. Whether surface vessels of the United States fleet were in action against the enemy could not be learned at once, but columns of water rising from the sea as shells hit the water indicated a naval action.
The radio came on and said Pearl Harbor, and I just kind of went and sat back and said, yeah, you know, because I was still going on 17 and really wet behind the ears, so that I was a young teenager and I didn't know any better. But I sure learned fast.
Yes, yes.
I went ahead and I turned 17, and in December of that year, December the 28th, I enlisted in the Navy. And I asked the Navy, can you wait long enough to let me graduate from this high school? I've been going there for 6 years, junior high school and senior high school. And you know, after 6 years of service in one place, at least you want to get out of it legitimately.
Sure.
So they allowed me. 3 days after my graduation, I said, Dear Bob, you know, like a Dear John letter.
Right, yeah.
Will you please report? It didn't say please report, report.
Right,
And I went from Los Angeles up to Farragut, Idaho to a snowstorm. Can you imagine that?
Now, you know, I wanted to ask you, we've talked a little bit before, most sailors on the West Coast, for instance, my uncle, he was in Watsonville, California. That was where he was born, and that's when he heard about Pearl Harbor, and they had just gotten out of church, and they knew it was war, that meant war. And frankly, they were terrified, as a lot of people on the West Coast, probably not Nebraska, Jim here, but people on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, what was keeping Japanese aircraft carriers from coming over and hitting us, hitting the mainland?
They had submarines that actually torpedo the shores of Ventura, California.
I've heard that, yes.
Yeah. And they hid the evidence real fast, less than 24 hours.
Well,
you couldn't see signs of it.
It would have been terrible morale, let's face it, terrible morale. Yeah. But that's where he was at, and like you, he was 16 when Pearl Harbor happened, but when he turned 17 in March, his mother and father signed, and he went in the Navy. Yeah. Now, how did you happen to choose the Navy? Was it just something like Jim?
No, it's something I always pictured myself not dying in a ditch. You know,
you'd rather drown like a rat.
You know, the Navy had a reputation of having their bunks right with them, and good chow.
Well, what I was going to say, he went to boot camp in San Diego, but you went to boot camp in Idaho. How did that happen? Why?
I have the faintest idea. The powers that be said, hey, I will go.
So it had nothing to do with you initially being assigned to merchant marine ships?
No.
And then where did you go to boot camp?
Why?
Where did you go to boot camp as a Marine? Paris Island?
No, San Diego, California.
You went to The Nebraska boy goes to San Diego and you go to Idaho.
Believe it or not, after boot camp, I wound up in San Diego for gunnery practice for 4 weeks. Then I got shipped up to San Francisco to the Armed Guard Center. And the Armed Guard Center is the Navy gun crew of the Navy. And we sailed on the Merchant Marine ship. We were their gun crew because the Merchant Marines were not allowed to shoot the gun.
And how many Navy personnel would they have on a Merchant Marine ship? And let's explain, because if teachers do tape this, Bob, what was the activity of a Merchant Marine ship?
The Merchant Marine ship delivered supplies, goods, to the outlying war areas.
Right.
Not into the war area zone itself, but to the outlying area.
Right.
And we had to protect the Navy interest in that.
So these Merchant Marine ships would deliver food supplies, medical supplies, I would imagine, ammunition and gasoline for the airplane.
And machinery for the CBs.
Right.
My first ship carried a deck cargo. It was lashed down to the deck, and they built catwalks all the way from the midship to the forward gun tub and also to the stern. And we were required to stand our watches at those gun tubs, regardless of what the weather was.
Well, before we leave Pearl Harbor, I'd like to read a couple of lines here of the damage that was done in Pearl Harbor and show that there really was justification for people in California and Oregon and Washington to be very concerned about Japanese aircraft carrier or submarines, as you pointed out, just tooling over here. Let's see. But it was in the waters of Pearl Harbor that the Navy suffered most. Here were assembled some 86 vessels of many types, which formed the major strength of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Of these, 18 were totally destroyed, and many others were severely damaged. And all the Navy suffered on this single infamous day a greater loss of personnel than it had during all of the Spanish-American War and World War I combined. Fortunately, we didn't have any aircraft carriers in Pearl Harbor. Thank God they were out. I mean, truly, thank the Lord above, or I could be a blonde speaking Japanese to you right now. Yeah. So, okay, we've touched on Pearl Harbor. Now, Jim, after you got out of boot camp, where did you go? Give us the highlights of your military career.
Well, I came out of boot camp, I was rather lucky because I was sent immediately to the Naval Air Station in Seattle.
There was a Navy Air Station in Seattle, yes, not to be confused with Whidbey Island.
Right.
Okay.
And I was on the security force there guarding the property. I stayed there most a year and happened to meet my wife there.
Oh, just happened to meet your wife. Do tell. And, she was a Seattle girl, was she?
She was well, she actually came from Bothell, which is north of Seattle.
And you've been in Washington ever since, never went back to Nebraska?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the end of that particular. Okay, so what happened?
After about a year, I was sent back to San Diego to infantry training school. And after 1 week at the training school, there was a order came out for so many people to switch over to the tank battalion, tank training school. And I was selected with that group, and after finishing tank school, the company started forming that I was to be in, which would B Company, 4th Tank Battalion. And they moved into a new area in a brand new camp at Camp Pendleton.
Oh, okay, yes, I'm familiar with Camp Pendleton. They were getting ready to go overseas?
Well, no, because we were new. We still had more training.
More training, okay.
So we were in barracks. The company commander was forming up the tank crews, picking so-and-so to be in this crew, and this guy to be the commander. All the assignments were made for the number of tanks that we had.
So did you become proficient in tanks?
I had a MO of a tank man. But
just exactly what was your job in the tank? I mean, once you got overseas, what was your job description?
You're getting ahead of my story. When we moved into this area and the crews were all selected, we didn't have any tanks yet. And we had to eat in several different mess halls because there was a brand new mess hall just being finished. And the mess cook of the company came through the barracks. She says, I need some help real bad. We've got to open this new galley. And I says, well, I didn't get selected for a crew, so I'll come over and help you.
Oh, okay, you weren't selected for a crew at that point. Okay.
So I'll go down and help you open that galley. Well, lo and behold, I never got out of that galley.
Oh,
I became a cook.
Oh, okay, okay. So you became a cook in the Marine Corps,
In the Marine Corps.
Not to jump too far ahead, what were you doing at Iwo Jima? Surely you were more busy than just cooking.
Yeah.
Should we save that for a little later? What happened to you after you got out of boot camp? You were assigned to what ship? And did you know that you were going to go on a merchant marine ship, or were you kind of surprised?
In a way. At the end of boot camp, they gave us a choice. We could make selections of what areas we wanted to get into.
Well, yes, I know about making selections, and very seldom does it work out.
I picked the Armed Guard Service because I wouldn't have to stick around in boot camp that long. They would move me right away quick. And they said, okay, you got the Armed Guard Service. You're going down to San Diego for training. So we shipped down there for 4 weeks, and boy, did I get seasick. The USS Sacramento.
Oh, okay.
A knot and a half to 2 knots in the swells. And boy, I had to dry heaves for almost 4 days. I think I lost about 20 pounds.
So you were really getting your Navy legs.
I was going to say, wow, this is going to be my life in the Navy, seasick. But that was the last time I got seasick.
Oh, good.
And
well, good
when
for you.
I got out of the San Diego training, they sent me up to San Francisco, Treasure Island Armed Guard Center. And there they assigned me to a ship out of Portland, Oregon. Brand new Liberty ship.
Now, when you say Liberty ship, what do you mean Liberty ship for our younger audience that may be watching? When you say Liberty ship?
This was actually the backbone of the merchant marine fleet in those days. They built them by the jillions almost. They had to, they got sunk so fast.
Right. So it was really hazardous duty being on a merchant marine ship.
Yeah, most of the time you were out there all by yourself, nobody protecting you except yourself. We didn't have any depth charges. All we had is try to run away from them.
Right.
And my first ship, we left Swan Island, and it's one of the ships didn't break in half. We got a good one. William Hume, by the way. And that belonged to the lumber company up here that owned it. And we sailed down the Columbia River, stopped at Beaverton, Oregon, loaded blockbusters down with the bilge line, and they put them in, and they boxed them in with wood.
Did you have any idea where the ultimate destination was going to be?
Nobody knew.
Oh, just the captain. So you were clueless.
The captain didn't know until he got his sailing orders, and he didn't know.
Right, yeah,
Because we loaded up in Beaverton, Oregon on the blockbusters and went out of the mouth of Columbia down to San Francisco into Oakland, Camp Night, and we loaded asphalt, aviation fuel, and machinery.
Right.
And they had added a deck cargo that they chained down, and they built a catwalk so we could get to our gun station.
I see.
Then we sailed out of there, and then we found out after we sailed that we were going to go to Australia.
All the way to Australia. That's quite a trip.
That's 21 days for Liberty ship.
Now, did you see any action on that 21 days?
Nope.
Well,
saw a lot of seas.
Yes.
We had water come over top the bow, not a spray, but water. And we were standing on our watches at the forward gun tube, and that water washed away the forward catwalk. And our officer, a 90-day wonder, still demanded that we man our guns.
Were you able to tie yourself to them or strap yourself in?
No, you hung on for dear life with black rubber lash suits on and floated half the time.
And I guess you probably got close to Jesus during those times.
Boy, amen.
Now, at what point did you, I mean, obviously you have to take a ship, and did you see action other than Iwo Jima? Because that's toward the end of the war, is it not?
That was the
so let's hear some of the big highlights of you in the Pacific.
After leaving Camp Pendleton, we loaded ships in Oceanside, California.
California, okay.
And, or not Oceanside, but San Diego, which is right close to Cleveland, together. And joined an armada of 15 or 20 troop ships, plus destroyers and cruisers that would escort us, and we went straight to the Marshall Islands, which was in the, and
now, one of you gentlemen, your vision's got to be better than mine. Since I'm a frustrated wannabe teacher, note how big the Pacific Ocean is compared to the Atlantic. I mean,
a lot of water.
It's almost double. Can you point out to, okay, now here's Australia, and I don't see that well. Can you point out where the Marshall Islands?
Right over here, my finger's on it now. Right in there, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Okay, a lot of the battles that, for instance, my uncle was on the Saratoga, which was an aircraft carrier, and then it got hit, and then he got reassigned to the USS Pennsylvania, which was a battleship. And from Alaska, fighting in the Aleutians, and down here, it seemed like he hit every conceivable battle. But a lot of these battles, am I right, gentlemen, happen, what do we call this, the South Pacific?
South Pacific.
South or Central Pacific.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to point that out to kids or young adults that may be watching, and it's a reminder for us older folks too. We're talking about a really big ocean, and it just has, I've heard, gazillions of various islands. And to give the big picture, these islands were important because the Japanese could use them for their aircraft.
Correct.
Right?
And use them for their supply bases.
Right, and of course we're wanting to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right, so we're defending. So, okay, you went to the Marshall Islands, is that right?
To the Kwajalein Atoll, and the islands we invaded was called Roy and Namur.
Oh, amen.
And they were two islands connected by a causeway. The island on the left was all airfield, and the island on the right was where all the barracks and the housing and everything was for the Japanese. And the landing was opposed by quite heavy fire, but we did get the first day probably 150 yards or more into the island.
In fact, Jim is pictured behind us here, and isn't he a handsome guy? Oh, you say you're 19 years old there?
I'm 18 and 19 while I was
Now, did you send that to your folks at home? Was that taken after you got out of boot camp? Or was that later in your career?
That was taken while I was at Naval Air Station.
Well, that's right, that's right. You both went in at 17 years of age, so 19, you'd already seen a lot of action. Do you have some photos you want to show us of your war efforts, where you were at?
If you can see them, I don't know if you can or not.
Well, let's try.
all three of these plus the Marshall Islands.
Now, the Iwo Jima is noted for that. I forget the photographer. There was actually a program on the Discovery Channel.
Rosenthal was his name.
That's right. I'm glad you. Famous picture. I guess it just went around the world. And they actually have a very big monument statue of this in Washington, D.C. And I remember as a little girl, because my mother's people are all very close to the Washington, D.C. area, that I was bragging that, oh, that was my daddy, because I knew he was a Marine. Well, my goodness, you better hurry up and show your picture, because we have run out of time. There's Bob, what a young, handsome man, full of confidence. Well, folks, gee, this time went by fast. I could have went another half hour.
We haven't got the war done yet.
We only got started.
Stay tuned next month, people. This is PJ Scott, and I want to thank Jim Johnson, our Marine, representing in the Marines, and I want to thank Robert Gardner, representing the Navy and the Merchant Marines, and I'm an old Navy wave. And as always, I like to end the show by thanking our veterans. Get to know a World War II veteran and thank them for their efforts. Thank any veteran you know for their efforts. And as usual, I ask you to pray for our active duty military personnel. See you next month.